300 million people. That was the population of China in the 19th century, and one of the most powerful empires in the world turned that entire country into a massive market for drugs. Not the mafia, not cartels, not underground gangs. The British Empire did it. And when China tried to stop the drug trade, British warships opened fire on Chinese cities. An actual war started over drugs. And the most shocking part is this: Britain won. Schools barely talk about this story, but it became the beginning of the fall of old China, and one of the reasons modern China still remembers the humiliation brought by foreign powers. This is a story about money, addiction, empires, and one of the dirtiest business schemes in human history. In the 18th century, China was a global superpower. Europeans were obsessed with Chinese goods. Tea, silk, porcelain. Everything coming from China was incredibly expensive, especially tea. In Britain, tea became part of everyday life. Rich people drank it, poor people drank it, workers and aristocrats drank it. But there was one huge problem. China barely wanted anything from Britain. The Chinese Empire considered itself the center of the world. The emperor viewed Europeans as distant barbarians from small islands. Britain brought goods to China, but the Chinese had no interest in them. So Britain had to pay for tea with silver. Tons of silver. Over time, this became a disaster for the British economy. Silver was flowing out of the country. So the British East India Company began searching for a way to force China to buy something in return. They found a product more addictive than any advertisement: opium. Britain already controlled India, and India was perfect for growing opium poppies. The colonial government forced Indian farmers to grow poppies instead of food. Thousands of acres of farmland became narcotic plantations. The opium was pressed into bricks, packed into crates, and shipped to China. Officially, opium was illegal in China. But that did not stop the British. They created a massive smuggling network. British merchants transferred the drug to middlemen near the Chinese coast. Those middlemen carried it deeper into the country. The system worked perfectly. Chinese buyers paid with silver. The silver returned to British hands. Britain used that silver to buy Chinese tea. And the cycle repeated again and again. Britain made enormous profits, while China slowly drowned in addiction. By the early 19th century, millions of Chinese people were smoking opium. At first, it was popular among the wealthy. Then the drug spread to government officials, soldiers, and ordinary farmers. Addiction destroyed entire families. People sold their property just to buy another dose. Government officials stopped doing their jobs properly. Soldiers became weak and dependent. Some Chinese cities became filled with opium dens. And the irony was brutal. Now silver was flowing out of China. Exactly what Britain had feared before. China's economy began collapsing. The emperor understood that the country was losing control. So the government decided to act aggressively. In 1839, the emperor appointed an official named Lin Zexu to fight the opium trade. Lin Zexu was known as an honest and ruthless official. When he arrived in Guangzhou, the center of foreign trade, he launched a massive crackdown. He ordered opium warehouses shut down. Drug dealers were arrested. Foreign merchants were pressured. Then came the moment that enraged Britain. Chinese authorities confiscated more than 20,000 crates of opium. That was tons of drugs worth millions in today's money. The opium was publicly destroyed. Workers mixed it with lime and dumped it into the sea. For China, this was an attempt to save the country. For British merchants, it was a financial catastrophe. And this is where the story becomes truly insane. Britain decided that destroying narcotics was a reason for war. The British government claimed China was violating the principles of free trade. In reality, the world's most powerful empire was demanding the right to sell drugs without interference. In 1839, the First Opium War began, and it was completely one-sided. The British Navy was one of the most advanced military forces on Earth. Steam-powered ships, modern artillery, highly disciplined troops. China was not prepared for this kind of war. British ships easily destroyed Chinese coastal defenses. Cities along the coastline came under attack. China lost battle after battle. In 1842, the Qing Empire was forced to sign the Treaty of Nanking. It became one of the most humiliating agreements in Chinese history. China had to pay massive compensation, open new ports to British trade, grant special privileges to foreigners, and hand over Hong Kong to Britain. But even that was not enough. The opium trade continued. A few years later, the Second Opium War exploded. This time, Britain was joined by France. Foreign troops captured cities, looted imperial palaces, and forced China into even more unequal treaties. Eventually, China was effectively forced to legalize opium. Imagine the scale of that humiliation. A country tried to protect its people from drugs, lost the wars, and was then forced to officially allow the drug trade. For China, this became a national trauma. The period after the Opium Wars is still known in China as the Century of Humiliation. It was the moment China began losing power, territory, and influence. Many historians believe the Opium Wars marked the beginning of the collapse of old China. Even today, the Chinese government constantly references these events. Because for China, this is not just a story about drugs. It is a story about powerful nations crushing weaker ones for profit. And the darkest part is not even the opium itself. It is how openly everything happened. One of the most powerful countries in the world used the addiction of millions as a business model, and did it almost officially. When people think about empires, they often imagine discoveries, technology, and progress. But empires were also built on wars, colonies, narcotics, and broken nations. The story of Britain and opium is a reminder that some of the greatest crimes in history are not committed in secret, but under the flag of a state.